And we're back again with another segment of MI Tech TV. Matt is under the weather today, won't be joining us, so I'm flying solo, but I think I can handle it. Joining us are Dan Lohrmann. He's with Presidio. I think you're a vice president there, aren't you, Dan?
I am a VP, yeah, and field CISO as well. Yep.
Okay, and then Richard Stiennon. Richard and I go back to his RustNet days. We even co-wrote a novella together, and now he does the Security Yearbook and a bunch of other things. I think the new one's coming out next month, isn't it?
This month. Well, next month, April.
Yeah, we'll get
April
April's
29th.
tomorrow.
Yep.
So obviously you can tell we're recording this in advance. So let's talk about one of the big issues right now, particularly in the cybersecurity world, came up last week with the signal issue, with all the people from the various the CIA, FBI, you name it, all on the call. Somebody was even in Moscow at the time using a commercial app, kind of like WhatsApp, but it's called Signal, to communicate with each other. The administration's point of view is no big deal, nobody got hurt, successful mission, blah blah blah. I want to hear what you guys think of this because you already know what I think of it, which is not a hell of a lot. So I think it was absurd, but that's my point of view. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it was a screw up. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. We can talk about a lot of different aspects of this, but I know in my days when I was at the National Security Agency, and a lot of colleagues in three-letter agencies today, they say even unclassified conversation should be handled on the secure networks, and that the networks that are equipped to handle classified data. We can get into whether this was classified data or not. Clearly, it was very sensitive data that should not have been shared. I know most people believe it was probably classified data, but I'm not the one to classify data, so I'll leave that to other people. But clearly, this either way, it was a big mistake to use this, and the implications are obviously huge. I mean, whether or not other people we can get into whether it could be hacked or not, and those kinds of discussions. I think we'll go there in a few minutes. But clearly, it was routed to somebody it was not intended to be routed to. A lot of the controls that needed to be in place were not in place. And we can talk about what we all can learn from this from other apps, because I see this all the time with business email compromise. I see this with corporate organizations doing the same thing, sending corporate information using Gmail and that kind of stuff. We can get into that, but I mean, in a word, it was two words. It was a mistake, and it should not have been done.
Yeah, the person that broke the story was on the call, and he didn't sign up for it. So suddenly, I was reading some stories. He was like middle of Saturday afternoon. He's getting these reports on this mission. He was also the editor and the editor in chief of the Atlantic. So I mean, clearly, he's not in the security apparatus, or he shouldn't be. What do you think of all this, Richard?
Yeah, I'm horrified, as is everybody else, of course. But yeah, I agree with Dan. Screw ups happen. This just happens to be a major one. And it's, when you look at all the people that are actually on the call, right, they're all really, really evil idiots, right? They just don't understand the way the world works. They want to remake the world in their image of what it should be. Some of them are, I mean, I can't say enough bad things about every single person on that, except for the editor of the Atlantic. So it couldn't have happened to a better group of people that they broke the law and could, if they had official military positions, they would all be immediately kicked out of the military or in the spy agency. A number of them are appointed. They should be unappointed. I don't know if that takes impeachment to do or just fired by the president of the United States. So that's my opinion. As far as their OPSEC, obviously, just it's horrible. As Dan mentioned, the appropriate place for a chat group discussing impending military operations is secure channels on secure networks, right? Go to a skiff if you want to have those calls. That's what the situation room's all about. The I mean, it beyond the pale. It reminds me of the State Department leaks, where that was, an insider, actually stole all the State Department communiques and leaked them to WikiLeaks. Same, just it reminds me because of the topics of conversation, which were kind of similar to this, right? Policy decisions, things that shouldn't be out there. So it's just as bad as the State Department leaks. Luckily, shorter, and hopefully there some risks at least will be slapped, and they'll stop using their cell phones. I don't care what software they have loaded on them; those cell phones are not secure, and they hopefully will stop doing that.
Yeah, let us hope. Now, the normal you mentioned, I think, it's pronounced skiff? Is that the room that they go into where they surrender their phones? Let's talk about what normal procedures are. We're talking about an attack that was they were talking about it a couple hours before the attack was launched. Luckily, that didn't get hacked. Luckily, the Houthis didn't hear about it. Otherwise, those poor pilots would have been flying into a storm of missiles, right?
Yeah, evidently we now have evidence that one, if the Russians were on any of their phones, they didn't want to reveal that by taking action on information that they had gained, or they just didn't care, for the Houthis or Iran in this case. So, but it also reveals, really, are these the right people to actually take a roll call to see who's thumbs up, thumbs down, shoot missiles at the Houthis? Were those the right people on the call? Because a lot of them were just assistants to the principals, and yet making these critical decisions about people's lives.
Yeah, Dan, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, there's so many things you could say about this. Clearly, it was a violation. I think I'd like to think about, for all who's listening, and there's hundreds of articles on this. I'd like to take this conversation, which I think is a very important conversation, even wider to everyone out there saying you're sitting in Detroit, you're sitting somewhere else in Michigan, around the Midwest, and you're saying, how dare they? And listen, the consequences and the stakes, I don't know if I would characterize those people quite like Richard did, but I would say this. Clearly, it was inappropriate what they did. I would say a few other things. Everyone out there needs to be wary of this. Whether you use Signal, whether you use Gmail, there are hundreds of FBI stories on the FBI website to talk about similar things. Again, I'm not forgiving these people for what they did. It's wrong. But it's what the trend is, and the challenge for all of us, okay, is to use unauthorized networks for things they were never intended to be used for. So people every day of the week, and again, not forgiving the situation of what happened in the DoD, people, they have work networks, and those networks have all kinds of controls in them. I'm not even necessarily talking about classified. I mean, just basic tool sets. I can name a bunch of different vendors. Richard knows them better than I do, that do things to make sure that the people that you're routing these things to, you're not sending a copy of it to my wife by accident, that the data is going to who it's supposed to be going to for the proper purpose, for the proper need to know reasons. And then the challenge we all face, which I would say for every person listening to this, and I say it to myself and to Richard and to you, Mike, and everyone else, is, yeah, but Bill's not on that network. Sarah's not on that network. Frank's not on that network. I, therefore, am going to go ahead and I'll just send it. Nobody will know. I'll send it over Gmail. Or I'll go ahead and send it over Signal. Or I'll go ahead and use some other network. And why? It's easier. I want to include somebody that's not part of the normal circle into this. Again, doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it right to do it for a corporate network or a government network for the state or county or city that you work for, but people do it. And then what they do is, and they bypass those controls. And so I could give you stories. If you want to hear some stories, Mike, I'll tell them to you, where large, breaches occurred because corporate people thought they were talking to their executive assistant. Hey, can you fill out this form for me? Can you go ahead and do this bank transfer for me? Don't tell anybody. We're about to acquire this company in China. Don't tell anybody. Just go ahead and wire this money to this other bank account. And they're sending that stuff over networks they're not intended to be sent over. So again, I'm not saying that it's right. It's not. But all of us should really, I think it begs pointing the finger back at ourselves and everyone out there who's listening is that's why we have need to know in security. That's why we have authorized lists. That's why we have software and controls in place to protect us. Now, in this case, this is come on, this is DOD. This is another level. This is military secrets. I agree. I'm not going to argue that. Richard, I'm not going to defend them in any way. What they did was wrong. And that's it is what it is. I would just say to everyone listening, be wary. We all hear don't reuse passwords. Do we reuse passwords? We all hear don't use authorized networks for authorized data, for authorized wire transfers, for authorized communications, and yet people go outside those networks. So I just would challenge everyone to look in the mirror and see if they're doing some of the same things.
Richard, I know you're really plugged into the vendors and whatnot. Is there somebody out there that you could use on, and it wouldn't be on a typical commercial cell phone, a special cell phone kind of setup where you can communicate this? Does such a thing exist?
Well, first of all, I mean, I use Signal personally, and Signal is trusted by many to be interceptable, right? Even if somebody did intercept a message, they couldn't decrypt the signal, right? So that's what I recommend.
Till quantum computing gets popular,
Yeah,
right?
whatever.
That's a whole other thing. We won't get into that, but go ahead.
And Signal will be the first that uses post-quantum encryption, so it'll be fine then. So yeah, you got a time frame, right? Anything you say now within 5 years could be decrypted, etc. if it's captured. But there's still the issue that you're using a phone that can easily be hacked by law enforcement, especially, or national intelligence agencies. They all have tools that they can download to your phone to see it, the same thing you see on your screen. So that's why it's not a complete defense. All that said, if you are looking for commercial options, CoolSpan is a good commercial option. And then there are some other actual physical handsets that you can purchase as well, but they are, they're the sort of thing that a intelligence agency would buy, or it's not something that the average consumer would be able to invest in. So I'd stick to using Signal. I want to mention the last time somebody used similar to a chat group in Signal, and that was somebody using a Discord server to brag about his access to intelligence material. And Jack Douglas Texera, back in 2022, basically posted images of top secret documents that he had access to because he was in the Air Force. He's been arrested and he's serving 15 years in jail. And I think because we're kind of a rule of law and nobody's above the law kind of country, that all the participants in that Signal chat channel should suffer the exact same fate. 15 years in jail. That'll be fine.
Yeah, I did watch the news this morning. We're recording this on Monday, March 31st, and no one's going to get fired. No one's going to get reprimanded. It's just like shrug shoulders. Oh, well, we made a mistake. I agree with you, Richard, that somebody needs to pay for this, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen with this administration. Dan, any thoughts? Or go ahead,
Statute of limitations is 7 years. This administration only lasts 4.
Oh, good point. Yeah. Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get involved in from a cybersecurity perspective. I do think I agree fundamentally with the details of what Richard is saying about what happened was inappropriate. I think it was a violation of policy. I think the laws say that that's not what you do. How it gets how we penalize or how we punish the individuals involved, that's for another pay grade. That's really not for me to say. I think there are plenty of examples in the Biden administration as well. That's why I like to keep personally, and you guys, I shared this with you, Mike and Richard. We can talk about Doge, and Richard and I are on other shows where we're talking about cuts and this and that, where people are saying, the creation of Doge was the biggest cybersecurity breach in the history of mankind. I don't agree with that. I think OPM was way, way worse than anything that's gone on. But I mean, the reality is, I think partisanship should stay out of this. In my view, it should not be a partisan issue for Democrat or Republican. In my view, not that you guys are making this a partisan issue. I think you're talking about the facts of the case. But I'm saying, for me, there were certainly examples in the Biden administration that people could point to of things that should have happened or could have happened. But I would just say, yeah, I mean, the reality of it is, for all of us out here listening, talking, describing the situation, I think Richard did a good job of saying, it is an encrypted app. If you're doing FaceTime, if you're using other tools, your typical, iPhone texting, that's not encrypted. And so people should be using, Signal. I'm in Signal groups with CISOs from all over the country. Former CISOs, there are groups of different people who are communicating, using it for various purposes that are appropriate. But we're not discussing any classified information. We shouldn't be. People shouldn't be, not that I have done in those Signal groups. I also use it. I think it's a good tool. It is an encrypted tool. And I think, people are using that, around the world is because of the encryption, the tool that is available. But again, I'm going to stay out of saying what the penalties or punishment should be and just say it was inappropriate, it was wrong, it shouldn't have been done. And we all need to learn from that. And we all need to really take note and say, are we, in fact, using the networks we should be using for the appropriate purpose?
And we haven't talked about WhatsApp. For some reason, everybody, especially in Europe and Israel, uses WhatsApp. And,
yeah, I use WhatsApp too. So go ahead.
Yeah, it's free. You should never use WhatsApp. Ever.
Never use it? No, bad?
Ever.
Never.
Facebook
Oh, okay.
has access to all that, right? So there's a commercial entity that has a relationship with law enforcement, and all of your conversations are discoverable and usable by Facebook's algorithms.
So Richard and I would disagree on this one. We would disagree sometimes. I mean, I agree. I would never use it for work purposes, for any sensitive data. I know people that use WhatsApp. My wife uses it. We lived in England for a few years back in the 90s. My wife uses WhatsApp to have a conversation with her friends. I think it's great for that. I mean, there's nothing wrong. Now, to your point, Richard, you may say, yeah, but what if they're having a private conversation? Well, define private, what their kids did last week, at school or something. I mean, I don't know. I mean, somebody
the Russians can find out about that. They don't care, right? So
I would not say that that's necessarily, top secret, naval intelligence, but so I think there are purposes for WhatsApp that are appropriate. I agree that from a work perspective and who has access to the data, you need to really think about the appropriateness of the apps you're using for the data that you're using. I mean, I FaceTime with my daughter who lives in South Carolina. Say, well, Dan, you should never use FaceTime. Well, we're just chatting and we're looking at the kids and we're seeing what my grandson got for his birthday. I mean, if the world wants to, if that's being copied by the Russians, then so be it. I mean, they can see my grandson getting his birthday gift. That's my view.
okay.
I'm shocked. Totally shocked that you could say that.
You're shocked that I say that.
Yep, totally shocked.
Okay. So you never use FaceTime, Richard?
Yeah, only because I don't have access to it. I don't have an iPhone.
Okay.
But
okay. You can do it on a MacBook too. That's how I do it with my daughter.
I
trust Apple.
I'm a believer
Apple.
in privacy, Mike. I'm a believer in privacy. I'm a believer in protecting information. I also think that there's a convenience aspect of some of these tools. I think where the challenge comes in is where people end up, again, using them for inappropriate purposes. And I think you need to really think about that and make sure that it's appropriate.
You mentioned Doge. Oh, didn't mean to cut you off, Richard. Go ahead. You got a thought? Go ahead.
Yeah. The trouble is, and this is exactly the problem that the people in Signalgate had, right? It's hard to discern between appropriate and inappropriate, right? So you get on a group and, okay, we're going to talk about the situation in the Middle East, fine. And then all of a sudden it turns into, active operation launching missiles in 15 minutes. And you're still talking about it and you're in the wrong group, right? You're in the wrong technology platform, et cetera. It's the same way the initial email encryption solutions came out. They all added a encrypt message button to the email. And, so now you're asking the end users to decide if this message needs to be encrypted versus, the normal message that I send to people. And that people just never used it, right? And so that's a real big problem.
Well, that was it. I just jump in here, Mike. And I understand where Richard's coming from on that. And that's, when I was at NSA, we used to have happy hour at the pubs all around. They would, back in those days, it was these huge all you can eat buffets. If you got one beer, you could have a free buffet, right? So everybody would hang out. And they would tell us, we all had black badges or green badges, all the class, all top secret clearances. And they're like, don't talk to anybody who wasn't cleared, because there might be Russian agents hanging out at the pub. And it was like, even if you're small talk, you're just talking about what kind of car you bought last week. Richard's right about this. Very quickly, it could start talking about work, and you could start talking about. And so in that environment, I totally agree. If you're hanging out with colleagues who are also cleared, that was the modus operandi we were all trained in the military and in the civilian three-letter agencies. That was the safe way, was you use the classified phone even for unclassified conversations. I totally agree with that. Where I'm just making the distinction, Richard, is I don't have classified conversations with my wife because she's never been cleared. And so for me, I'm making a distinction between home and work and personal conversations, not with professionals. I think there's a big difference for, the Secretary of Defense talking to J.D. Vance at the White House than there is Dan talking to his wife about what I'm having for my birthday. I mean, and so they're not. I am. Maybe you think I'm splitting hairs, but I'm not. I mean, in my mind,
no. I think perfectly legitimate, and it's a great discussion because you can be the purist, right? And there are many of them at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, for instance. But privacy is something we have to be so diligent about, in that we fall into a trap. We go, WhatsApp, and I'm just going to talk to my friends about meeting somewhere for lunch. That's fine. Trouble is, next thing you know, your friend calls, they got a problem with somebody else, and somebody's having an affair, and, should they do this? And it becomes very unprivate, very, very quick.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
For work, in work conversations, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned, because we're running out of time, got about 5 minutes left. Doge, as we know, there's a certain individual that likes to use the chainsaw to cut through federal agencies. And I'm wondering, is that happening at NSA? Is that happening with the DOD? And what's going on? I haven't heard much about that. I think they're more targeting other agencies. But what are your thoughts about the fellow from South Africa?
Interesting. The thing I find most fascinating right now is and I'm gonna divide this into two parts quickly, maybe a minute on each, and give it to Richard. One is there's a Doge effect happening nationwide. I mean, I have a chart here in front of me on the wall that I'm looking at all the states that are putting together their own. They're not calling them Doge, but there's a Doge effect of cuts. And it's not all Republican states either. I mean, state of New York, state of Hawaii, putting together efficiency efforts nationwide. So I think there's a lot of movement right now around the whole topic of, is there waste, fraud, and abuse? How can we possibly look at this? And so I think that's happening. I think you're starting to see, really the final chapter hasn't been written on all the different agencies that are going to be impacted by this in the federal government. I know there are agencies that are taking steps through their own efficiency cuts before Elon Musk and the Doge organization even shows up, because they want to kind of like, maybe if we clean our own house, clean their own room first, when parents show up, and they're not going to make us do more, if you will. So, I mean, there's a Doge effect happening nationwide and in the federal government. I also draw the distinction between, I think there's some things here that are good, like I said before, that I think can be a positive thing, things that we had to do in state government, that we had to balance the budget every year in the state of Michigan, and we had to make cuts for furlough days and things like that were very positive. And I think there are other things that maybe, where we're cutting some muscle and we're cutting some bone. So I think that's a really important conversation. I think it remains to be seen how much is, but I guess I'm just not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think some of these efficiency efforts are positive. I think there's also some things, honestly, that maybe are going too far, but I'd love to hear Richard's thoughts.
Yeah, to the extent that there's any Doge effects and others are cutting in advance, this is exactly what Timothy Snyder refers to when he says, first page of his book on tyranny, do not obey in advance. Do not start kowtowing until a gun's actually to your head. Don't go, ooh, I'm afraid that the government's going to come get my role, my position. So, as a law firm, for instance, I'm going to go to them and negotiate a $10 million under the table, payback in services to the Trump administration, so they don't come after me. As a manager of a department, I'm going to remove all references to women and DEI from my website in advance. They haven't ordered me to do so. I'm going to do it to demonstrate that I'm on their side and that they shouldn't punish me. At the NSA, at the famous cryptography museum, they actually covered up a wall devoted to women cryptographers. They covered it with brown paper so that they wouldn't be witnessed as supporting so-called DEI. That's the right word. Drug DIE, whatever it's called.
DEI, yeah.
DEI, thank you. It's despicable. It is totally despicable. And obviously for red states to go, woo, we're going to do the same things, as despicable as what's happening in the federal government right now. And Dan, I am so surprised that you can support federal actions at this level that are not efficient in any term. Laying off half of a department and then trying to hire them all back and you've lost their addresses, you can't reach them. That's not efficiency. This is not what's going on. So wake up, realize that just because it's called efficiency doesn't make it efficient. And the systematic tearing apart of all of our federal government system is underway right now. We're 70 days into it. We got 30 more to go before the first 100 days. It's a complete disaster.
I'm giving Dan the last word. Go ahead, Dan.
I'm just going to say I respect my friend Richard. I think we're going to agree to disagree on this one, but I think there's definitely a lot of things that time will tell. The results, and I think that overall there's a lot of things that are being weighed right now in Washington from a cybersecurity perspective. I think we all need to look at this from a nonpartisan, even a bipartisan perspective, as I've shared before. In my view, through all the years I've been in this business, and it's been over 30 years now, work from my days at NSA and state of Michigan and working in the private sector, it's always been, no one wants to get hacked. That's always, whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, no one wanted to get hacked. And so working together on the cybersecurity, I think is really important. And so that's my approach. That's what I'm trying to look at, not taking sides, Democratic, Republican. I've worked for Democrats, I've worked for Republicans, I've worked for independents, and I'm trying to take a positive view on this. So, but I appreciate you having us on, Mike, and letting us talk about it. And I know you always give us a chance to let people, you want to reach out to me, Dan Lohrmann on LinkedIn or Lohrmann on cybersecurity at govtech.com. You can read my columns at Government Technology Magazine.
And Richard, how do they reach out to you? How do they buy the new and improved Security Yearbook coming out in April?
Well, after this broadcast, I'm sure they can find me in El Salvador in a high security facility.
But how do they get your book? Well, you can probably do it from El Salvador, right?
Yeah, you always go to Amazon to get Security Yearbook, and you can pre-order the 2025 edition coming out in 30 days.
30 days.
Great book.
Thanks, Dan.